Hey there, architect of your future. Let's conduct a small experiment. Take your daily planner or look at your to-do list in your planning app. How many tasks do you mark with words like later, next week, or when I have time? If the answer is more than 3, then welcome to the Chronic Procrastinators Club, which, according to a Carleton University study, includes about 94% of the planet's population. According to research by neurobiologist James Clear, author of the bestseller Atomic Habits, each time you postpone a task, your brain rewires neural connections. You're not just moving a task to tomorrow, you're literally reprogramming your brain to perceive postponement as normal. You know, ancient Romans called this akrasia, a state where you act against your own interests while perfectly understanding what you're doing. Even Marcus Aurelius, emperor and philosopher, wrote in his journals, "Don't act as if you had 1,000 years to live. The inevitable is already hanging over you. While you live, while you still can, become better." Chapter 1. The Neurobiology of Postponement. I can't make myself start. A phrase each of us has uttered approximately 6,500 times in our lives. But what actually happens in your brain when you postpone an important task? Professor Tim Peichel from Carleton University, who has dedicated 25 years to studying procrastination, discovered an amazing fact. Inside our brain, a real neurochemical battle takes place. The limbic system, responsible for emotions, literally takes control from the prefrontal cortex, responsible for planning and decision-making. This is like a situation where 2 drivers try to control a car simultaneously. An experienced navigator with a map, prefrontal cortex, and an impulsive teenager, limbic system, who shouts, "Let's go get ice cream." MRI studies conducted at Stanford University showed that when a person postpones an important task, the same area of the brain activates as during physical pain. Your brain literally perceives an unpleasant task as a threat and tries to protect you. Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman calls this cognitive bias of temporal inconsistency, when your present self prefers comfort, but your future self will have to pay the price. But there's good news too. Dr. Jane McGonigal discovered in her research that simply being aware of this battle already gives you an advantage. When you understand what's happening in your brain, you can hit the pause button and make a conscious choice. Now, let's meet the main enemy of action, the illusion of the perfect moment. Chapter 2. Exposing the perfect moment. I'll start on Monday, as soon as I'm well rested, when inspiration strikes. If every perfect moment we waited for turned into a coin, we'd all be millionaires by now. Professor Dan Ariely from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology conducted a series of experiments in which he discovered the phenomenon of future self-planning. We sincerely believe that our future self is some improved version, more disciplined, less tired, more motivated. Spoiler from neuroscience: this is a cognitive illusion. A study published in Psychological Science showed a shocking result. Our brain literally perceives the future self as another person. MRI scans showed that when we think about ourselves a month from now, the same brain regions activate as when we think about complete strangers. Dr. Kelly McGonigal, in her book The Willpower Instinct, describes a paradox. The more we believe in the perfect moment in the future, the less likely we are to start acting now. It's like saying, "Why should I run if a bus will arrive later?" But the bus may never come. The solution proposed by the American Psychological Association is surprisingly simple: the technique of micro-commitments. This is a scientific term for promising yourself to do something so small that your brain doesn't have time to get scared. Studies show that after starting an action for just 2 minutes, in 80% of cases, you'll continue working longer than planned. Why? Because starting an action triggers the release of dopamine in the brain, the neurotransmitter of pleasure and reward. But even knowing this, you might face an invisible obstacle, the emotional weight of tasks. Chapter 3. The Emotional Gravity of Tasks. Imagine the task write a report. From a physics perspective, this requires minimal energy expenditure. But why does it feel heavier than carrying a refrigerator to the 5th floor without an elevator? Oxford neuropsychologist Elaine Fox discovered an astonishing fact. Emotionally loaded tasks activate the same brain regions as real physical exertion. Literally, your brain perceives an unpleasant report as a marathon run. At Harvard's Laboratory of Emotional Intelligence, they called this the emotional gravity effect. The more negative emotions associated with a task, the heavier it seems, regardless of its actual complexity. Here's what's really surprising. Studies have shown that our brain automatically adds emotional interest to tasks we postpone. The longer you put off writing that report, the more emotionally heavy it becomes, even if the task itself hasn't changed one bit. Here's an example from research. Two groups of participants had to perform identical tasks, but the first group was told it was an intelligence test, while the second was told it was an interesting puzzle. Guess which group procrastinated more? Right, the first one, simply due to the emotional burden associated with intelligence assessment. Dr. Fazio from Stanford University proposed a revolutionary approach: micro-emotional separation. The essence is to separate action from emotions. Instead of, I need to write a report, and it's terrible, I'll look incompetent, my boss will be displeased. Simply, I need to open a document and type a heading. Sounds simpler, doesn't it? Studies show that when we focus only on physical actions, ignoring emotional burden, the probability of completing the task increases by 61%. Try this neurohack. Before a difficult task, write down only the physical actions you need to perform on paper. No emotions, no interpretations, just actions. But even with this tool, you might encounter yet another obstacle: perfectionism, an elite form of procrastination. Chapter 4. Perfectionism, Designer Procrastination. I just want to do everything right. Sounds noble, doesn't it? It's like going to a job interview and answering the question about weaknesses with, sometimes I work too hard. Dr. Brené Brown, a vulnerability researcher from the University of Houston, after interviewing more than 10,000 people, came to a shocking conclusion. Perfectionism is not the pursuit of excellence. It's a deceptive protection from a very primitive fear, the fear of being ordinary. Studies conducted at the University of Toronto identified 3 different types of perfectionism. 1. Self-oriented, I must be flawless. 2. Socially prescribed, others expect me to be flawless. 3. Other-oriented, everyone around me should meet my standards. And all 3 types significantly increase the likelihood of procrastination. What's really interesting, MRI studies conducted at Stanford University showed that when perfectionists see unfinished work, the same brain region activates as during physical threat. Your unfinished project is to a perfectionist's brain approximately what a tiger in the bushes is to a primitive human. Even more surprisingly, according to a University of Sydney study, people with high levels of perfectionism are on average 33% less productive than those who have a relaxed attitude toward mistakes. Paradoxically, the pursuit of perfection often leads to worse results. Dr. David Burns, author of The Perfectionist's Script for Self-Defeat, proposes a revolutionary cognitive technique, planned imperfection. The idea is to deliberately include small imperfections in your work to desensitize the brain to the fear of mistakes. And renowned psychologist Adam Grant suggests the reverse 180-20 rule. Do the work at 100% on a mental level. Think it through completely. Execute at 80%, leaving room for improvement. Show it to 20% of the critically important audience for feedback, and only then refine it to perfection. Studies show that work completed at 80% and launched brings more benefit than perfect work that never sees the light of day. But even after overcoming perfectionism, you might face the final obstacle, the energy paradox. Chapter 5. The Energy Paradox. I don't have the energy to start. Possibly the biggest misconception in productivity history. It's like saying, I can't start the car because it's out of gas, which I can only get at a gas station, which I can only drive to in my car. Professor Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, author of the flow concept, in his 30-year study discovered a phenomenon he called the energy barrier paradox. The essence is that starting an activity requires energy, but continuing that same activity generates energy. A study published in the Journal of Experimental Psychology showed remarkable results. People who started working despite lack of energy reported higher energy levels after 20 minutes than those who decided to rest to regain strength. Here's what's truly surprising. Neurophysiologists from the University of California discovered that the state of procrastination is associated with increased activity in the brain area responsible for perceiving physical fatigue. Your brain literally creates a feeling of tiredness to justify inaction. An even more shocking fact, according to research published in Nature Neuroscience, we spend up to 40% of our brain's energy budget worrying and thinking about tasks we're postponing. It turns out that procrastinating is energetically more expensive than acting. Psychologist Kelly McGonigal called this the energy paradox of laziness. We don't do something because we're too tired, but the inaction itself and associated thoughts drain us more than action would. The solution to this paradox is what sports psychologists call the 5-minute rule. Start an action for just 5 minutes, promising yourself that you can stop after that if you really want to. In 80% of cases, you'll continue working because the first minutes of action trigger a cascade of biochemical reactions that generate energy. Another powerful method is energy distribution. Studies show that our willpower and energy are limited resources but renewable. How exactly? By alternating periods of concentration and rest. The Pomodoro method, 25 minutes of work, 5 minutes of rest, is based precisely on this principle. But the most surprising discovery was made quite recently at Stanford University. If you determine in advance what you'll do during rest periods, for example, a 5-minute walk, your brain will perceive work periods as less energy-consuming. Your brain literally conserves energy when it knows there's planned rest ahead. How to overcome procrastination? Now that we understand the science of procrastination, let's move on to specific methods to combat it. These aren't just tips. They're proven scientific techniques that will change your life if you give them a chance. The Swiss cheese technique. Professor Barbara Oakley, author of A Mind for Numbers, proposes an approach she calls the Swiss cheese method, making small holes in a task instead of trying to eat the whole piece at once. Choose a large task you've been postponing. Identify the smallest, easiest, or most interesting aspect of this task. Spend just 5 minutes working only on this aspect. Repeat the process, making new holes, until the whole cheese disappears. The time window method. Neurobiologist Andrew Huberman from Stanford University discovered that our brain has natural productivity cycles tied to circadian rhythms. Most people have a 2 to 3 hour period of increased concentration during the day. During the week, track at what time of day you feel most energetic. Identify your productivity window. Plan your most important and difficult tasks for this time. Protect this window from distractions at all costs. The if-then planning technique. Professor Peter Gollwitzer from New York University, through 94 independent studies, proved that using if-then plans increases the probability of completing a task by 300%. Instead of simply, I'll write the report tomorrow, create a plan. If I drink my morning coffee tomorrow, then immediately after I'll start writing the report. If I feel the desire to check social media, then I'll first write one paragraph of the report. The implementation intention. Dr. Heather Schonfeld discovered that people who create detailed action plans in advance are 71% less likely to procrastinate. Every evening, make a plan for the next day. Gather all necessary materials and tools in advance. Eliminate possible obstacles and distractions. Visualize exactly how you'll perform the task, mental rehearsal. The strategic imperfection. Professor Al Fingerbaum from the University of Pennsylvania proposes a technique he calls strategic imperfection, deliberately lowering standards for the first version of work. Consciously decide to make the first draft poorly. Forbid yourself from editing during the creation of the first version. Set a timer for 25 minutes and write price work without stopping. After creating the poor version, move on to improvements. From understanding to action. Now that you understand the neurobiology of procrastination and possess practical tools to overcome it, it's time for the most important part: action. Here's a simple suggestion. Choose just one technique from those we've discussed. Try it tomorrow. Don't try to change your entire life in one day. That's also a form of perfectionism. Remember the words of neurobiologist Andrew Huberman. Neuroplasticity is not an event, but a process. Your brain literally restructures itself with each new action, creating new neural connections. Each time you overcome procrastination, you make it a little easier for your future self. And last but not least, be kinder to yourself. Studies show that self-criticism enhances procrastination, while self-compassion reduces it. So the next time you catch yourself procrastinating, don't scold yourself. Just notice it, smile, and take one small step forward. As Lao Tzu said more than 2,500 years ago, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Take that step today. Share in the comments your main task that you've been postponing and the technique you'll try. I'll respond to everyone with specific advice. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like if the video was helpful. See you in the next videos.